Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. It's absolutely free. My name is Silem. I'm very pleased to meet you. In today's video, I'm going to teach you guys how to make a shirt with a bishop collar. I already have a video on my channel where I show you guys how to make a shirt jumpsuit. If you haven't seen that video, please do check it out. And that video, the shirt part of the jumpsuit is a regular collar, like the full collar. But in this video, I'm going to teach you guys how to make a shirt with a bishop collar. Okay, so if you want to see how to do this, then definitely keep on watching.
Oh, hey, I didn't see you there.
For my front piece, I folded my fabric in half and I made sure that the width was my hip circumference plus extra 3 inches, while the length was my normal shirt length. Now I placed it on top of another piece of fabric again with the same dimensions for the back. Now what I did was, when I placed the front piece on top of the back piece, I made sure that the back piece was slightly longer, and then I folded it right there at the top, and then I ironed that flat. Now from that fold at the top, I marked 2.5 inches downwards, and from the fold of the back, I also marked 2.5 inches. Now I drew a curve to connect both points, and then I'm just cutting along that curve. This section of this video, it's more visual than audio. You have to learn more by what I am doing as opposed to what I'm saying, okay? But I hope I really explain it to the best of my ability. Now I marked her armhole line, which is 8 inches from the top, which is the fold. I also marked her bust point measurement, which is 11 inches, under bust 14 inches, hip line 23 inches, and length of the shirt 30 inches. Now I'm just going ahead to extend all those lines. So you have to go ahead and measure all of these measurements so that you know what to mark on your own shirt. Okay, now I divided her bust measurement by 4, marked that on the bust point line, and I added 2 inches allowance. I also divided her shape measurement by 4, marked that on the under bust line, and I added 2 inches allowance. Moving on to the hip, I divided her hip measurement by 4, placed that on the hip line, and added 2 inches allowance as well. And then at the hem line, I just marked the same measurements for the hip, and then I just connected all those points together. Now I divided her shoulder measurements by 2. I marked that on that baseline, and then I drew a curve from that point all the way to the armhole line. And now I'm just cutting along that hem line as well. Note that I added 1 inch allowance on the shoulder after dividing it by 2 and marking that on the baseline. I'm going ahead to just cut along the lines I had marked earlier, and then I'm also cutting open that that allowance for the button that's at the front. You know that this is a button down shirt, so the front piece is going to have that allowance in front for the buttons. Now I just took out those pieces, and then taking another piece of fabric, I'm just going to go ahead and cut my sleeve. I folded the fabric, and now I'm going ahead to just fold it again because I'm cutting both sleeves at the same time. Now the length of my sleeve is 13 inches, but I just added that ½ inch allowance because my fabric is not so much for me to add 1 inch allowance. Ideally I would mark 1 inch allowance. I just drew a curve for the armhole, and then I'm just dividing her round sleeve measurements, placing that, marking that point, and then I added 1.5 inches allowance as well. Now I also marked her elbow measurements at the bottom part of the sleeve. I marked that point and I added 1.5 inches allowance as well. I'm now cutting along the curved line. Okay, so if this was a much shorter sleeve, I might not need to add the elbow and measurements at the bottom. I will just stick with the round sleeve measurements. Now for the collar, I measured the circumference of her neck to be 16 inches. So for the collar, I'm just marking it to be 17 inches. So that's extra 1 inch allowance for sewing. And now I'm using a hairstay or a cloth gum to just place on this piece. I put some water, I sprinkled some water, and then I'm going to iron it to fuse the gum with the fabric. Now once I was sure that they were fused together, I went ahead to just trim out the excess gum that I have. And I'm just folding the piece into in half. Now note that this piece is 3 inches wide and 17 inches long. So it's 3 inches wide, 17 inches long. I also went ahead to just fold it and then curve out the sides so that it's not like square. Now moving on to the shirt again. Now the front piece that has that allowance, I'm just folding it inward and then I'm just sewing it down so that the rough edges does not show, and then I can go ahead and just sew that down. Okay, so that's why I folded it like that. I did the same thing for both pieces. So there's the both pieces of the front. I did the same thing. I folded it. Now after folding and ironing it, I went ahead to use my pin to just pin them in place so I can take it to my sewing machine and sew it down. Same thing with this other piece of the front. I folded it and I also made sure that I pinned it down. It's important that you pin it down so that everything is nice and neat when you have to, or when you get to sew it. Now these are the two front pieces. This is what they look like up close. So I went ahead to just fold it neatly, and then I'm just going to go ahead and just sew just at the edge. Okay, just at the edge, all the way from the top to the bottom. Now moving on to my sewing machine, that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I'm just sewing that allowance down just the way I folded and pinned it. I'm just going to just sew from top to bottom. And I did that for both pieces of the front. Now taking the back piece, I'm just opening it up, and then I'm placing one piece of the front on top of the back piece. Okay, so I placed them right sides facing. So I made sure that the right side of the front and the back were facing each other, and then I went ahead to sew the shoulder of both pieces together with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I also did the same thing for the other front piece as well. I placed it on the back piece, right sides facing, and I also went ahead to sew the shoulder with 1/2 inch seam allowance as well. Once that was done, this is what we have. Now I turn this to the right side, obviously, and then I'm just going ahead to just mark this midpoint, and then I placed 1/2 of our shoulder measurement at that midpoint. So our shoulder measurement is 15 inches, 1/2 of that is 7.5. I placed that 7.5 inch mark on that midpoint, and then I marked the 0 point on one shoulder, and I marked the 15 inch point on the other shoulder. I also went ahead to add 1/2 inch to both points. Okay, so I added 1/2 inch to both points after getting the actual shoulder measurement. Now from that shoulder downwards, I made sure that my the armhole line was at 8 inches, and then confirming that, I also went ahead to just draw a curve from that point all the way to the top. Okay, I did the same thing for the other side as well. I just made sure that the armhole was at 8 inches, and then I just drew a curve to connect that point on the shoulder. Now after cutting both front and back pieces together, I went ahead to just trim just the front slightly again. Now what this does is that it gives a very good fitting, especially when you're making a shirt for a woman. Okay, that extra cut on the front armhole gives a very good fitting. Now I want the band of my sleeve to have just a nice notch at the center. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys how I do that. So like a V-shaped notch at the center. So I just folded that band in half, and then I just cut it right there at the center. Now the length of this band is the same with the width of the sleeve, while the width of the sleeve of this band rather is 4 inches wide, but when it's folded it's 2 inches. Okay, so once I notched that, I flipped it to the wrong side, and then I'm just going to just sew along that V shape that I cut out. and I'm just turning into the right side. You can go ahead and use a sharp object to just push out that edge to make sure that everything is, you know, nice and smooth. Now taking my sleeve, I'm just folding it in half, and then I'm just going ahead to just notch the midpoint of the sleeve. Okay, now opening this up, I now place the band. I also made sure that the midpoint of the band aligned with the midpoint of the sleeve, and then I went ahead to just pin, you know, the band and the sleeve together. And I'm going ahead to just sew both of them together, obviously right sides facing, and then, you know, I sewed it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. And this is what it looks like. See that very nice lovely notch? So you can do this on any other part of your you know, sleeve. Now taking my, you know, shirt, I'm just making sure that I have it, you know, sitting the right way, and then I'm just going ahead to just notch that the midpoint of the shoulder, and then folding my sleeve again, I'm also notching that midpoint of the sleeve, that's the top part. Okay, now opening up my shirt, I'm now placing the midpoint of the sleeve, making sure that it aligns with the midpoint of that shoulder on the shirt. Now I'm just starting from that midpoint, and then I'm sewing from that midpoint to one side, and then I'm going to start from the midpoint again and sew to the other side as well. Note that I haven't shapen my sleeve, neither have I shapen my shirt. Now what I mean is that for the front piece and the back piece of the shirt, I haven't gone ahead to sew them together at the sides, neither have I folded my sleeve and shapened or sewn it with the client's actual measurements. Okay, I didn't do any of that. I'm just simply sewing the shirt and the sleeve together at that shoulder. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to fold it back, and then I'm going to shapen the shirt from the sleeve all the way to the body of the shirt and all the way to the hem of the shirt. Okay, now this is the time where I'm going to mark the actual measurements. So I divided her elbow measurement by 2. I marked that at that band of the sleeve. I also divided her round sleeve measurement by 2. I marked that on the top part of the sleeve, and now I'm going to have to just sew that down. For the body of the shirt, I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch seam allowance when I'm sewing, because you know I had added 2 inches allowance to our actual measurements. So since I added 2 inches allowance, I'm just leaving about 1 inch allowance when I'm sewing, so that there's that 1 inch ease. Since it's a shirt, it's not supposed to be too tight on her, so that's what I did basically. Now this is what we have, guys. So easy to make, very easy to make. Can you see how simple and neat it looks? Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and put in the collar. You can see the nice notch of the sleeve. Now for the collar, I had already folded and ironed it, you know, with the wrong sides, with the right side rather facing me. Now I'm going to have to just flip it over to the wrong side, and then I'm going to fold it the same way, but this time the wrong side will be facing me. Now I'm going to just go ahead and just sew that curve closed. Okay, you know that the curve was open at the sides. I'm just going to go ahead and just sew along that curve and then just close it up together. I'll do that for, you know, the both sides. So I'm just folding it again to the wrong side, and then I'm just going ahead to just close that curve, or sew the curve closed. And then I'm going to flip this back to the right side, and you can see how neat our, you know, the curve of our bishop collar is. Very easy. See? Now once we have that done, obviously I'm going to go ahead and just iron it. Now I'm just opening up, you know, the collar, and then I'm just going to go ahead and just place it at the start of, you know, that neckline. Place it there, and then I'm just going to go ahead. I'm taking only one side of the collar. So just one side of the collar is what I'm sewing now. I did not just take 2 of them and then sew both of them to the shirt. So I'm sewing just one side. Okay, take note of that. Once I get to the ending part, I'm just going to cut, you know, the thread and take it out. And then I'm going to take the other side now that I didn't sew earlier, and then I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that that seam allowance is sitting right under the collar. Now I'm going to go ahead and also fold the collar inside and then sew. So by folding it inward, it's going to just, cover that rough edge of the bishop collar. Okay, so I'm just going to fold it in and then sew it down. That way you have a neat collar both at the front and at the back. So when they are looking at it, the shirt on the right side, the collar looks neat, and when they are looking at the shirt on the wrong side, the collar also looks neat. Okay, so this is very important that you do. You don't have to weave it. If you don't have a weaving machine, you don't have to worry about that. Look at how nice the bishop collar looks. Look at how it's standing. The neck is going to fit just right. Okay, so this is what we have basically, guys. Very simple, very, very easy. Now for the buttons, you want to take 3 inches apart. They should be 3 inches apart, and the width of the buttonhole should be 1/2 inch wide. Now this is what the finished look is. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.